The lights in the control unit of ADX Florence flickered for just a moment, but in that moment the silence cracked. A scream cut through the hallway, a raw, desperate sound that echoed off the concrete walls. Guards rushed toward the source, their boots thundering like a drumbeat, but they already knew what they would find. One of the most dangerous men in the prison had made his move. In a place designed to be escape-proof, violence-proof, and almost human-proof, he had found a way to turn the deadliest wing of America's toughest prison into a battlefield. When they reached the cell, the steel door rattled from inside. Something heavy had slammed against it. The guards hesitated, hands tightening on their batons and shields. Then, without warning, blood began to seep from the slot where food trays were usually passed. The unit froze. Something terrible had just happened inside the most secure cell in the country. But what? That question, what exactly happened in that cell, was one that haunted the control unit for months, and to understand it, we have to go back to the beginning. ADX Florence sits in the dry desert of Colorado, a fortress of concrete and steel. Known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies, it was built to hold the worst of the worst: terrorists, mob bosses, cartel leaders, and violent lifers who could never live in a normal prison. And within ADX, there is one place even more feared than the rest: the control unit. This is the deadliest wing, where inmates are locked down 23 hours a day, and every step, every breath, every whisper is watched. Life in the control unit was meant to be simple. No contact, no risks. Prisoners ate alone. They exercised alone in tiny concrete yards called dog runs. Even when they were taken out of their cells, they were shackled at the waist, ankles and wrists, with 3 guards on them at all times. On paper, it was impossible for violence to happen here. Yet violence had found a way in. It started with whispers. Inmates began scratching messages on the walls of their cells with whatever they could find: tiny bits of stone, broken plastic, even their own fingernails. Guards discovered words like blood, trap, and watch the door etched into the walls. No one knew if these were warnings, threats, or the ramblings of men losing their minds to solitary confinement. Then came the tension. Food trays left outside cells were sometimes hurled back at the guards with terrifying force. On one occasion, a guard carrying breakfast had his arm nearly broken when an inmate slammed the slot shut with perfect timing. It was like the prisoners had memorized every movement of the staff. The unit became a place where even routine felt dangerous. But the true breaking point came one night when an inmate named Torres, a man with a reputation for violence even inside maximum security, decided he wasn't going to play by the rules anymore. Torres had been locked in solitary for years, and his mind had turned restless, sharp, and unpredictable. Somehow, he managed to create a crude weapon from a piece of metal torn off a vent. The prison was designed so that nothing like this could happen, yet Torres had done the impossible. That night, during the scheduled tray collection, Torres waited silently. The guard slid open the slot, expecting compliance, but instead, Torres lunged forward. In a split second, he drove the sharpened metal through the gap, catching the guard by surprise. Blood splattered across the grey wall. Alarms blared through the control unit. Inmates began pounding their doors, some cheering, others screaming. The entire wing shook with chaos. The guards outside Torres's cell scrambled to regain control, but the damage was already done. The control unit, the most secure place in the most secure prison in America, had been breached, not by an escape, but by a single act of violence that proved no place was truly safe. And as the alarms wailed, Torres's voice rose above the noise. "This is only the beginning," he shouted, his words echoing through the corridor. Guards tightened their grips on their weapons, knowing the night was far from over. The door rattled again. Something heavy hit the inside. Then came silence. Thick, choking silence. Everyone held their breath. That was when they heard it. The sound of chains dragging inside Torres's cell. What happened next would change the control unit forever. The dragging sound inside Torres's cell made the guards freeze. The hallway was still ringing with alarms, but for a moment, all anyone could hear was that scraping noise, metal against concrete. Then came the laughter, low at first, then louder, echoing down the wing like a signal to every other inmate locked away in those steel boxes. The lead guard barked orders. "Shields up! Breach on my command!" The officers formed a tight line, shields locked, batons ready. They knew Torres was unpredictable. They also knew one wrong move could turn the control unit into a riot. When the heavy steel door finally swung open, the guards stormed in. Torres stood in the middle of his cell, shirtless, his chest heaving, his eyes wild. In his hand, he clutched the makeshift weapon slick with blood. Beside him, the food tray slot was stained dark red. The guard he had stabbed earlier had been dragged halfway into the cell by the wrist shackles, barely conscious, bleeding heavily. The sight sent a chill through the officers. Torres had done the impossible. Not only had he attacked, he had pulled one of them into his world. "Drop it, now!" one guard shouted. But Torres didn't drop it. Instead, he grinned, lifting the sharp piece of metal higher. For a second it looked like he might finish the job right there. The officers rushed forward. Shields slammed into him. The struggle shook the walls, tore. Rez fought like a man who had nothing left to lose, his laughter turning into a roar as they tried to pin him. It took 6 officers to finally wrestle him down. Chains rattled as they shackled his wrists, ankles, and waist tighter than before. The injured guard was dragged out, blood leaving a trail on the floor. His fellow officers' faces were pale. Everyone knew this was supposed to be impossible. The control unit was built to crush the spirit of men like Torres, but Torres had just proved it wasn't perfect. When they dragged him out of the cell, the other prisoners exploded with noise. Some banged their fists on the doors, others shouted curses or cheered as if Torres had struck a blow for all of them. The wing sounded like a storm trapped inside concrete. The officers forced Torres down the corridor, his eyes locked on them with a look that was half victory, half madness. The next day, the control unit was different. The usual silence was gone, replaced with tension so thick it felt like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Guards walked the halls in pairs, their eyes darting to every slot and shadow. Inmates started scratching louder on their walls, tapping codes no one could fully understand. It was as if Torres's attack had awakened something inside the prison. Weeks passed, and the staff tried to restore order. Extra checks were added, food trays were handled with more caution, and every vent and crack was inspected. But the fear lingered. Torres had been moved deeper inside the facility, into a special cell where even he couldn't cause damage. Yet his words, "This is only the beginning," still hung in the air. One night, just when the staff thought things were settling, another alarm blared through the control unit. A guard sprinted toward the sound. This time it wasn't Torres. It was another inmate, one who had never caused trouble before. Now, hurling himself against the walls, screaming that he had found a way out, the guards rushed to secure him, but as they did, 3 other inmates began pounding their doors in unison. The concrete wing shook with the rhythm, like a drumbeat of rebellion. The officers realized it wasn't just one man anymore. The control unit itself was waking up, and Torres had been the spark. As the night wore on, the pounding grew louder, echoing down the long corridor, drowning out even the alarms. Guards exchanged worried glances, wondering if the deadliest wing of ADX Florence was slipping out of their control. And then, in the middle of the chaos, the power flickered again, just like the night Torres made his move. This time, the lights went out completely. The control unit, the so-called most secure place in America, was swallowed by darkness. And in that darkness, the pounding from the cells grew louder, sharper, like something alive, waiting to break free.